Alright, here we go. Episode 3. Uh, just like last week, I got nothing to say before we start this episode. Nothing's been going on. Really. Not that I can think of. This is so hard. As soon as you fucking start this shit, immediately your mind goes blank. You're like, I can't think of a goddamn thing to say. So, I guess that's why I do it with the fucking notes. Because I don't know. Maybe it's stage fright. Maybe it's just I'm not as smart as I think. It's probably the second one, dude. But yeah. So this is episode 3. It's gonna be about the Rhodesian Bush War, or some people just call it the Bush War. I'm trying to think of a funny name for it. The best one I've come up with so far is Honkeys in Africa. But even then, that's not great. I don't know. It's not like last week did. They did what with a dolphin? I think that was, of the two to pick from, I think that's the better one for sure. Because, I mean, they did it with a dolphin. They did it with a dolphin. It's not the point. Okay. So I guess before I get into this episode, if you don't know me and you're just listening to this, which, what's up, dude? Fucking shout out to you. This is like kind of political, like all wars are. So I'm gonna just try to show the facts, and I just think it's an interesting war. I think both sides are interesting, and I think it paints a picture of like why Africa is the way it is now. Yeah, and I think it also maybe shows what it could have been if there wasn't all this beef and stuff going on. But I just think it's an interesting war, and I think not a lot of people have heard about it. So, alright, let's jump into it. The Rhodesian Bush War from 1964 to 1979. This is going to be a really long episode, by the way. I have like 5 pages of notes here. Yeah, a lot of fucking notes. I took notes for like 3 hours straight because I didn't have class on Tuesday. And I was like, I'll do half, and then half turned into all of it. And all of it is fucking a lot. But it's about more than just the war. Like, this whole first page is about the colonial history of Rhodesia. Okay, so yeah, that's where we'll start. Damn it, fuck. I just don't want to put these shitty episodes out, but I've got to. Alright, the colonial history of Rhodesia. Originally part of a greater colony which was known as just Rhodesia, which was named after Cecil Rhodes, a mining mogul from England, who would go on to be the Prime Minister of the South African colony from 1890 to 96. And this guy was like, he was the goat of imperialism, kind of. Like, yeah, he was just like the goat of it. He went down there and he started mining and shit. And, yeah. And he was like absurdly rich. He was like the Rockefellers, basically. Um, and the whole Rhodes Scholar thing, if you've heard people say that, I used to think it was like a Rhodes Scholar, like someone who like traveled on the road and studied everywhere, dude. Just goes to show how dumb I am. No, it's named after this guy Cecil Rhodes, um, who was like absurdly rich and all that good shit. And he gave out this scholarship. I think it's to 102 people a year, which is kind of a lot if you think about it. So it's not that fucking impressive, but yeah, next time you hear someone say Rhodes Scholar, it's named after this dude who colonized half a continent. So, from 1893 to 1897, there was 2 attempts of rebellion in Rhodesia, which is what we're talking about. But Rhodesia and Zimbabwe, I might use those interchangeably, or I might I'm probably going to use them for when they were called that. So it was called Rhodesia from 1964 to 79, and before that it was called South Rhodesia, and before that it was just called Rhodesia or Rhodesia. Some people say it like that. I don't, because I'm not fucking prim and proper. But so in this area, which is now known as Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, um, there was two attempts at rebellion known as the Mutabele Wars. There was a decisive victory from the English, and the kill count in these wars. So it was the English and this one other group, this like group of like African, like some African tribal group, and it was 500 to 60K. And this wasn't really the English. It was like a company, like the East India Trading Company or the Hudson Bay Company, which are like kind of extensions of the government. I don't know. That shit's kind of weird, but um, yeah, it was run by the British South Africa Company from 1890 to 1923. So if you look this up on Wikipedia, it says it's a company victory with 500 to 60K killed, which that's not really a war, dude. Like, you hear that and you compare it to like the numbers of even this, like the Rhodesians versus the Zimbabwean rebels. Um, that was only like 10-1 KD ratio. I'm gonna use some Call of Duty terms up in here because I don't want to get too fucking into the war, but don't want it to be too serious. But yeah, they probably killed a lot of fucking civilians, especially this being like 1895. So um, like I said, it was run by the British South Africa Company, mostly for mining. I think mining minerals and diamonds, and probably some other things. But that was like the main economic driver in this, just the whole Southern Africa region. Um, and Southern Rhodesia was given self-governance, which kind of turned it into a colony. Oh shit, I skipped ahead. In 1923, the colony was broken up into Southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, Northern Rhodesia. It was Northern and Eastern Rhodesia, but eventually they combined to just Northern Rhodesia, which is Zambia, Bechuana land, which is now Botswana, and Nyasa land, which is now Malawi. Mostly, that probably means nothing to you. You've probably heard of Zimbabwe, maybe Zambia, and maybe Botswana, probably not Malawi. But yeah, that's just, and I have a map later on that I'll post on Instagram in case you're really curious, or you can Google it and get a way better image because my map's pretty shitty. But um, yeah. So like I was saying, Southern Rhodesia was given self-governance and used the Cape Colony system, which gave voting rights to land-owning men of any race. In spite of this, the Southern Rhodesian Parliament was almost entirely white during its existence. So yeah, I mean, we can figure it out here. And in 1951, the system ended up changing to only give um, blacks like a certain amount of seats in parliament, and like their votes only counted so much. So I mean, it was technically like anyone could, be in parliament and all the votes were the same, but it really wasn't. It was just these guys, the white people, being like the globalists. Not to get too fucking Alex Jonesy on you, but it was just them deciding uh, who would go in and who would like best serve the interests. Okay, Southern Rhodesia was uh mainly a mining based state in terms of economy. Like I said, um, although there was like farms and they like produced shit, they had factories and stuff. So I mean, they had like a whole, their economy was diversified, but it was mostly mining. In 1953, Southern Rhodesia, along with Northern Rhodesia and Nyasa land, formed the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, which joined together their economies and their defense. But that was really it. They still stayed mostly separate. It was kind of like an EU thing, maybe. But yeah, they still kind of were self-governing, and it wasn't like there was like a president of this federation. It was more like an like I said, EU type of thing. And this wouldn't really last long, as we're about to see. So, Rhodesian independence and the Bush War. I'm going to give you guys a real quick rundown of like the ethnic makeup of Rhodesia or Zimbabwe or whatever the fuck you call it. Like I said, I'm not here to make anyone mad. I'm just here to talk about this war. But it was about during the time of this war and independence and before independence a little, it was about 8% white, and that 8% owned 70% of the land, which is kind of important when we're talking about this war. It was about 91.7% like native black people, and then 0.3 other. Like mostly, I think it was like Asians, which is weird, but that was the majority. But I think it'd be like, I don't know, some shit that's closer to there, but fuck it, we ball. And so, yeah, I guess we'll just get into the causes of the war. The white minority, the white oppression of the black majority was one of the main causes. Whites own most of the land and the businesses, which, yeah, anytime a minority owns most of the shit, there's gonna be a war. Whether it's like rich versus poor or whatever, people are gonna get active. And after World War II, many European powers began to lose some control of their colonies, and they were basically like, all right, well, if it's not perfect, we're just gonna lose the whole fucking thing and just decolonize. Like, we already got what we needed out of here. We're already powerful as shit, so who cares? Which one of the main things was the transition of power to the black majority within 15 years. I don't know if that's happened with all of them, but that was what happened with Rhodesia or Zimbabwe or whatever you call it. Which, and if you know anything about this, it didn't go well. I'm gonna post a couple links to some documentaries in the description of this episode, and one of them, I'll fucking put a title above it so you guys know which one. They both are graphic, but the one about the mercenaries in the Belgian Congo, that one's really fucked up. So, I mean, like, a guy gets executed, a young guy, maybe like below my age, probably, gets executed, and this is on YouTube, fucking uncensored, and it just like shows that no warning. Like, they're talking about like how the mercenaries and like the local fucking rebels or whatever are going around executing people who break their rules. But then they fucking they just show it. So I'll post that one, and another one is it's about the Rhodesian Bush War, and it just shows how they like fought it and how effective they were and stuff, and how not effective the rebels were. So yeah, that's basically all that to say. The transition to power was not a good one, and we'll see later that it was very rarely like a peaceful transition, and not peaceful like this was, like genocide. Like, yeah. Which that's, yeah. I'm gonna choose a more lighthearted topic next time, because last one we had that dolphin that killed itself. This one we have a genocide, and it's just war, which is sad. But I'll try to choose a more lighthearted one. I was thinking pirates, but fucking pirates are running around raping people and shit. So, um, yeah, I don't know if I can say the R word. Fucking maybe I'll get shadow banned or something. I made it because I said a fact. I should stop. Yeah, this one is definitely. I don't know if Spotify will even let me upload it. So if it doesn't, I'll try to figure something out because of all the naughty words I'm saying. But so many white Rhodesians uh, saw the transition to majority rule to be necessary or at least inevitable. So they were like, yeah, they're gonna fucking have control anyway. But um, Ian Smith, the prime minister, and I'll say this about Ian Smith because people might look at this and think he's just like some evil colonial ruler. He was born in Rhodesia or Southern Rhodesia, what was Southern Rhodesia. So it's not like uh, it's not like he was like some dude from England who completely didn't understand the country. He didn't fully understand the country because he was obviously like some rich guy, but um, he kind of knew what was going on. He was born there, raised there. I do think he went to school in England, but he was from there. He wasn't like Cecil Rhodes or whatever, who just dropped down there. He was from there. But Cecil Rhodes, like I said, he was the Prime Minister of South Africa, so they were in there. But he was opposed to the forced transition. And when I first learned about this, like about a year or two ago, I thought he was for like a longer transition, um, to black majority rule, but no, he's just like completely fucking against it. Um, which and I'll also post a link to another podcast with this guy who was a soldier in the war. Uh, and he was like, yeah, everyone was like, what the fuck, dude? Like they're gonna rule. Just like why are you so against it? But his argument for it was that whites should be in power because they control most of the land. And also some people who were against it pointed to the Belgian Congo, which is one of the documentaries I'm gonna post as an example. And like I said, it's really brutal. Like, and it was just, in addition to it being brutal, it was just like a fucking mess, dude. Like in the documentary, they go into this battle to like free this village or this city from these rebels. And to be fair, they do. And these guys are a lot less worse than the rebels, but they free this place from the rebels and they instantly start fucking like looting it. And there's like a 24-hour looting period. And I think that's what they kill that young guy for, is that he went over the 24-hour looting period. So, I mean, I'm not saying they were right to like oppose black majority rule, but to be a little concerned is fair. But also, when they decolonized, it wasn't like they put no effort into it. They were just like whoever the most powerful like rebel group at that time was, they were just like, all right, lead the fucking country now. That's what they did in Zimbabwe too, and that led to a lot of bad shit. So, and it's not like mining just stopped. It was just handed over. It was just private corporations or the Chinese or the Russians came in and started exploiting them instead of the English. So, but Ian Smith made the unilateral Declaration of Independence in 1965, making them independent from Britain. So when people call this Britain's Vietnam, it's not, because they weren't British, they were Rhodesian, they were from this country. It was more like a civil war, or like it was kind of revolutionary, but it was a civil war, a revolution, I guess is the best thing to call it, because they weren't fighting like a colonial power. Um, they were fighting something that previously was a colonial power, but not really anymore. It is kind of confusing, but it's more like the Civil War. So just have that in your head. Um, and that was another cause of the war. And revolutionary groups funded by the Soviets and the China. The China, fuck it. I'm not kidding. First 10 episodes are gonna be hot shit. Next 10 are probably not gonna be great, but we're trying. And just the overall Cold War. This was kind of an extension of that, of the capitalists versus the communists and the socialists. Which I don't know what the difference between those two is, but apparently it's a pretty big difference because the Soviets and the Chinese hated each other, but I don't know what the difference is. So those are the causes of it. All right. This this is so many nuts. I'm gonna be here till fucking like 10:30. So this is the belligerents of the war. So on the side of Rhodesia, I guess. We have Rhodesia, Portugal, and fascist Portugal, and apartheid South Africa. So if you guys didn't know, at this time, Portugal, or at part of the war, Portugal was under the rule of a dictator who refused to decolonize. So they supported Rhodesia, like economically and politically, but they didn't give it any troops. South Africa gave 2,000 to 3,000 troops. Yeah, as we'll get to later. And any Portuguese that did fight in the war weren't sent by the government. They were like volunteers. And then on the side of the, I guess the Zimbabweans, we have ZANU, and then ZANLA is their military branch of that group. And let's see. Yeah, ZANU was socialists, ZAPU, and these are like abbreviations. So it's like, I think it's, I have no idea what it is, but it's like both of these, they're the Zimbabwean or the Zambian like revolutionary groups, basically. And then ZAPU, the military extension of that is ZIPRA. And then Mozambique, after 1975, that's when they gained independence, and a lot of the bases for ZANU, I think, were in Mozambique. And then I think ANC was just another like group. Oh, the African National Conference. That's what ANC stands for, and that was just political support. And then Zambia, which was independent at the time, was also political support. So, yeah, the surrounding countries, Zambia was independent, Malawi was independent, and those are both to the north of Rhodesia, and then Angola was under the control of Portugal. Bechuanaland was independent after 1966, so basically the entire time. South Africa was independent, but it was under white rule. And then Southwest Africa, which is modern day Namibia, was under South African rule too. So that tells you everything you need to know about that. So Rhodesia and South Africa were just the two countries that were under white control. And everywhere else was like, everywhere in that area was obviously a black majority, but yeah, those were the two independent countries under white control. And yeah, I guess we'll get into ZANU. So ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union, was a socialist militant organization that received support and military aid and training from China. And this was run by this guy named Robert Mugabe. Some of these African names I'm gonna have a little bit of trouble with, but I don't think there's too many in here. They're not too hard. I'm just fucking kind of retarded. So, and then we have ZAPU, which is the Zimbabwe African People's Union. And when I was learning about this, every time you hear something that's like the People's Republic Union of whatever the fuck, it's like, dude, stay away from whatever that is, because that's the most, like, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. What's the other one? Yeah, the People's Republic of North Korea. Like, dude, stay far fucking away from that. Because those motherfuckers are, they're not what they say they are. If you have to say that you're like a fucking republic or democracy or whatever in the name of your country, I don't trust you. I think you're lying. But and then we have ZAPU, the South African People's Union, or Zimbabwe African People's Union, which was a communist group that also received support and military aid and training from the USSR. And it was run by Joshua Nkomo. And Nkomo, he was, of these two groups, neither of them was great really, but Robert Mugabe was like, he was out of his mind corrupt. Like one of the most fucking corrupt, insane people ever. But Nkomo, he was alright. He was a fucking decent dude, and he was the one. He was a little more moderate, and so a lot of the negotiating the Rhodesian Front, which is the white party, did with the blacks, um, did with like the black majority parties, was with Nkomo and other like mid or not mid. Fuck it. It's so hard to do this. Your brain just goes blank. But like centrist, I guess. More moderate. Fuck, I just said the word and I forgot. Yeah. So he was a little more moderate. Mugabe was crazy. And if you watch, um, if you just look it up, there's a really good video, and it just talks about how Mugabe was like always out of the country whenever they were arresting his political opponents, or whenever they were like arresting the people who were high up in these parties, and so it's kind of like he fucking snitched on people in his own party. And we'll get to some of the other. That's that's not even like that's nothing to compared to what he fucking did. Uh, and obviously, you guys know Rhodesia lost this war, but yeah. So and that's a little bit about the two groups, and then the Rhodesian security forces was 10K regulars, 15K reservists, 8K police, and 19K police reserves. So a lot of people. I think it was about, and then 2 to 3 thousand South African troops from apartheid South Africa. So these were all white troops. But the thing about the Rhodesian security forces is that, let's see, conscription was mandatory for whites and it became mandatory for blacks. So this was like an integrated group. It wasn't an apartheid state. It kind of was. I mean, let's be honest here. It kind of was, but it kind of wasn't. It was is fairly equal for the time. For like a former English colony in Africa, it wasn't awful. It wasn't great if you were black, obviously, but it wasn't bad either. And we'll get to that later. But and then 2K volunteers from the Anglosphere, which is like the Commonwealth, which was Canada, New Zealand, Australia, maybe some Americans. I think that's it. And then Portugal, volunteers, not sent by the government. And then they received, Rhodesia received political support from fascist Portugal until 1974. And what was I going to say about Portugal? Yeah, that's just because the leader died. Like, the leader had a stroke. And I don't really know anything about fascist Portugal. Besides what they said in the documentaries. So Rhodesia was placed under an arms embargo from the UN due to pressure from the UK. Which, I mean, it just goes to show you how fucking like corrupt the UN is. Because there were people still had fucking colonies in Africa, right? That were doing far worse things that weren't under arms embargo. This was just like political pressure. They were like, oh, we don't want the fucking UK. The globalists tried to silence me. But I don't know why my mic always dies. It's fucking annoying, but That's just fucking part of the game, I guess, dude. Part of the grind. Most of you people would understand how fucking hard this is. This is harder than fucking laying cut. This is harder than roofing in a snowstorm. All right, but so like I was saying, who's scared of the UK? Like they couldn't even keep power over their fucking colonies, but yeah, they were under an arms embargo, which is kind of why they had to fight the war a certain way and why they used certain guns. But we'll get into that later, very soon. But uh, conscription was mandatory for whites, like I said, and eventually for some black people. I think the ones that lived in the city. I think because most of the blacks in Rhodesia lived out in the countryside, like lived in like the traditional villages and stuff. Uh, so I think that's probably why they couldn't force it. I'm sure they wanted to, but they were like, we can't fucking do it for all of them because they lived out in the bush. And let's see, I do have it written down, but Zimbabwe is mostly like flat grasslands, so it's not like there is forests and jungles and stuff, but it's not a ton. It's mostly like savanna. Uh, so that kind of gives you an idea. All right, so and here we're on to the armament. Zapu and Zanu, which is our uh, communist and socialist groups, were armed with pretty much any Soviet-made gun. AK mostly AK-47s and PKMs, which they took did horrible cap. Like in the documentary that I'm gonna post, they kill this guy and they're like inspecting his weapon because they sent every weapon back to some kind of lab for ballistics tests. And as they're taking it apart, dude, I don't know shit about guns, but there's like this spring, and it's barely even a spring. Like it doesn't bend or anything. It's just like a solid piece of rust, and it's like covered in mud. Um, and if you know anything about these guns, they're like impossible to fuck up. But that's how poorly trained that these people were. And then a PKM is just an AK-47 machine gun. But they did not take good care of the weapons. Uh, and then we're on to Rhodesia. Rhodesia was armed with Belgian FNFALs, which I think it's a Belgian design, but the reason they use these guns is because they were made in Rhodesia. So when the arms embargo was placed on them, they obviously couldn't buy guns or like receive guns. I'm sure they received some for like South Africa and stuff, but they had to use what they had, which was the FNFAL, which is like if you play video games, it's a pretty popular gun. And this is a 308. I think it said it was chambered in, or at least the majority of them. I'm sure there was other ones, but for people who don't know, that's a fucking big boy round. And these were like fucking like they had like 20 round clips in these things. Um, so 20 rounds of 308, which is fucking crazy, dude. That's like a one shot, one kill gun if you hit him in the chest. Like an AR-15, a 223, you can very easily kill someone with one shot. But this is like a guaranteed like blow your fucking head off gun. And then they had a variety of anything domestic they could get their hands on was what they wanted. But then they had like older foreign machine guns and pistols, things made in the UK and in Europe mostly. I think almost entirely. They had some American things. And then in terms of planes and stuff, they did have some like fighter jets and cargo planes and stuff, but they were all pretty old by the end of the war. Some of them were like World War II era. So that kind of tells you what they were fighting with. Obviously, all that because of the arms embargo. So the Rhodesian Bush War lasted 15 years from 1964 to 1979, which you're like, they declared independence in 1965. How did it last that long? But we'll get into that. And saw the death of roughly 20,000 people. 1,361 members of the Rhodesian security forces died in comparison to 10,000 guerrillas. Um, so security forces, that includes cops and stuff, and as we'll see later, you'll kind of understand why um, uh, some cops died in this war. And 10,000 guerrillas, so it was about 10 to 1, and a lot of civilians died. A lot of civilians of both races died. Um, so yeah, that's tough, but yeah, we're gonna do some real lighthearted next week. Although Zepu and Zanu fought the same enemy, they did not fight together and would butt heads before, during, and after the war. We'll see how they didn't really butt heads after the war. That fucking one side came in with a fucking sledgehammer and beat the shit out of the other side. Is a nice way of putting what happened. Um, but in 1964, Zanu forces killed a member of the Rhodesian Front, which was the ruling party, which officially, that was like the first shot fired in the war. Uh, yeah, and Rhodesian troops were well trained and battle hardened due to fighting wars for the UK. And I might do something about the Malaysian emergency, or whatever, the Malaysian conflict, which they fought in that war. Um, I'm sure they fought in like World War II, shit like that. A lot of them did, but basically anything the UK was involved with, and also that they probably fought like some rebellion, because I mean they were constantly rebelling, the the native people of the country, but uh, and yeah, I was about to say some, but I think I have it later in here. I can't remember. I'll say it eventually, but with South Africa to the south and Mozambique to the east, Rhodesia only had to worry about troops coming in from Zambia to the west and to the north ish. So that was good for them. But as we'll see later, they did have to worry about Mozambique. They never had to worry about South Africa, though. Early in the war, Zapu and Zanu focused on attacking white farmers and disrupting oil pipelines. So, like I said, a lot of civilians died. This is definitely one of the reasons. Um, but yeah, they were just trying to like fuck with the infrastructure. Maybe they were trying to like get them out without having to fight a full scale war, which they knew they would lose, and they did. Like, if you look at the numbers, if you look at pretty much anything, they lost like the war as it was fought, but they, they won. Fuck it, they just outlasted them, kind of. Like that's why people call it Vietnam again, because I mean the the ratio of life lost was, I mean, 1,300 to 10,000. That's like pretty fucking crazy, but Rhodesia still lost the war. But anyway, so the first major engagement between the two sides was the Battle of Sonoya uh, in April of 1966, where Rhodesian forces killed 7 Zanu guerrillas and took no losses. The rest of the decade would be like this, and really the rest of the war. I mean, as we'll get into later, they fucked them up. Like, it wasn't even close. And another reason it's not fair to compare it to Vietnam is because these dudes were super well trained. Even if they were like forced conscripts, they were super well trained and they were from there, right? Like, so they understood, and there was a lot of black people fighting on the side of the Rhodesians, whether it was for money or whether because they thought Rhodesia was right. It doesn't. They were fighting on the side of the Rhodesians, and they were from the country, the bush, as they the Rhodesians called it. So they knew what they were doing. They knew the landscape. They knew the terrain. They knew the people. Like in the documentary, it talks about how this one dude purposefully killed his own brother, who was fighting on the side of uh, one of the communist or socialist rebels. But so they knew what was going on. It's probably why they were able to do so well. But In 1975, Mozambique. Damn, dude. This is even that long. This is the length of the rest of the episodes, but Mozambique would become independent, and this caused Rhodesia to launch an offensive into the country and destroy um, ZANU training camps. So they were training, and then honestly, probably what they were going to do was go in, do some raids, kill a bunch of like white farmers, or like blow up a fucking pipeline or whatever, and then go back into Mozambique. But and I don't think this counts in the official death count, but the Silu Scouts, who was this it was a racially integrated, I guess is what you call it, group who killed 3 to 6 thousand fucking trainees uh from ZANU. So yeah, they went in there and they fucked them up, and they had like plans and stuff, and they called in a fair amount of airstrikes, which is probably how they were able to kill 3 to 6 thousand, and they probably didn't even lose 100 people, probably not 20. So yeah, they fucked them up, but. And in 1978, which is right before the end of the war, Zappu would shoot down a Rhodesian passenger flight with a heat-seeking missile, that's just fucking crazy, dude. I feel like that's so overboard. That's so crazy, but maybe they were just fucking around seeing. They were like, "Do you think this missile really works, dude?" And they're like, "No way it works. No way they gave a bunch of people living in a fucking village made out of a fucking village in the middle of nowhere or a working heat-seeking missile, but it did work, and they shot down a passenger plane. I don't know. I was joking earlier or just now, but they did go to the crash plane, and they were like, "We're going to help you," and then they killed everybody. So any survivors were killed, and so this caused Rhodesia to launch another offensive into Zambia, which was mostly airstrikes. Um, So yeah, a lot of civilians dying in this war. Oh shit, we're almost at the end. Damn, this episode is not gonna be as long as I thought it was. But I don't know. This last part, I do have a lot of shit that's not in the notes to talk about. But yeah, so a lot of civilian death and some raids into other countries near the end of the war, and also at the beginning of the war when they were just attacking like farms and uh stuff like that in the pipelines. These rebels were in Zambia, and they would go into Rhodesia, and then they would just retreat over the border, which is why I said what I said about um, the people from Mozambique doing that, the ZANU rebels from Mozambique doing that. Oh, here it is, Rhodesian soldiers fought in the Malayan emergency. So yeah, these guys knew what was up. In 1977, Rhodesian special forces began poisoning water supplies along rebel supply paths, which was this was kind of a last ditch effort because they were like, dude, we're killing. It's a slaughter out there. It really is, and we're still losing this war. So they were like, fuck it, we're just gonna start poisoning these people. We don't care who dies. So yeah, not a great move by them. But I mean, I'm not gonna take sides. But I do feel like the Rhodesians are kind of the lesser of the two evils. But either way, it was not going to turn out great. And this is a war that pretty much everyone agrees on. Both sides lost. Like it could have been if they if Ian Smith just agreed to this transition of power, it probably could have turned out pretty all right. I mean, it wouldn't have been perfect, obviously, but it could have been all right. But instead, we had this. So the Silu Scouts were some of the most effective soldiers in the war. In one instance, during a raid on a rebel camp, and this was, I think it was called Operation Eland, 84 scouts, 72 to 84, killed nearly 1,200 rebels without taking a loss. So basically, how they did this was, like I said, it was an integrated group. And also, in the documentary, you'll see a lot of a lot of the white soldiers do like Tropic Thunder blackface, like super accurate blackface, and like curl their hair and stuff. And it doesn't say outright. I'm sure if I just Google it real quick, I could figure it out. But I'm pretty sure they did it because the rebels wanted to kill whites more, and so um, they just made it look like they were black, so they didn't get killed by them. That's what I assume. But like the Silu scouts, they snuck into this camp and fucked fucked them up. Yeah, destroyed them. Probably killed a few civilians, and a lot of the civilians died, like in the Vietnam War, because um, the rebels lived among the people, so it wasn't a uniformed enemy fighting a uniformed enemy. But yeah, so that's that. And during the war, the Rhodesian SAS and RLI used low-flying planes in place of helicopters due to the embargo. More people jumped out of planes in this war more than any other war. And I'm gonna look something up real quick. Yeah, and so this was a counterinsurgency tactic called the Fire Force, and I'll get into how it worked. So basically, someone would call in a they'd be like, "There's rebels over here," and so like two helicopters would fly in, land, kind of secure a landing zone, um, for the people in the plane to jump out of or not, because like I said, the soldiers on the rebel soldiers were not well trained, so these dudes could kind of just jump out of planes and not have to worry about getting shot. But so an instance would be called in, two helicopters would fly down and land, and then there'd be like a commanding officer in one of the helicopters that would go up and he'd have binoculars and a radio, and he'd basically call shit out and be like, you do group A do this, group B do this, go around whatever the fuck. He'd fly over the battlefield basically, and like I said, call it out. And then after they kind of secured somewhere for the jumpers to land, and these guys were jumping out of like 500 feet planes. Jesus fucking Christ, dude. Planes that were flying at like 500 feet. Oh, that were 500 feet in the air. God damn, dude. And they'd sort of jump out of these planes. And so if you watch it, like the parachutes barely have time to open, and these were like fucking World War II paratrooper parachutes. Like they couldn't control where they were landing, so they and in the documentary they like land in trees, drop down, and just start fucking them up. Which is pretty fucking sick to watch it. But that was called the Fire Force, and that's how most of the war was fought. So they'd be called that there were some rebels, and they'd pull up and they'd kill all the rebels, and then they'd go into like whatever local village there was and like search it, turn it over. It wasn't like Vietnam though. They weren't like massacring citizens or civilians and stuff, because that sounds like a good way to have them not on your side. But yeah, they'd go in and they would like throw shit around, and they'd strip the people, all the men, naked, because allegedly rebels would always wear two pairs of clothes, which I guess makes sense. And they'd always fingerprint the rebels and like take pictures of them and stuff, which was kind of gives you an insight into how they looked at them. They didn't really look at them as like a legitimate fighting force, which, to be fair, they weren't. They looked at them as like a bunch of criminals, like thugs. So yeah, but that's basically how most of the war was fought. And they'd also call in a lot of airstrikes. And in the documentary, you see one of the planes they're using for this airstrike which just goes to show how like shitty their equipment was. The Rhodesian equipment was because of the embargo, but it's like a fucking, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a box with wings with like a giant like garage door on the back that they're just dropping bombs out of onto the rebels, and they did a lot of airstrikes. But yeah, that's kind of how the war was fought, and then this is kind of the end of the war. But due to the attacks on farms and civilian bombing campaigns, many whites fled Rhodesia, and the rebels, they didn't kill just white people; they killed black people, fucking en masse, like burn them alive. I, and like a lot of the conflicts in Africa, this it has something to do with ethnicity. But yeah, like they put a bunch of people in a fucking house and lit it on fire, shit like that. So the rebels weren't the good guys in this either. I mean, it's war with two losing sides. Um, but many Rhodesians viewed it as a war on crime. Like they just viewed these people as criminals, but they weren't really. I guess they were probably getting some money from looting and stuff, but they weren't really criminals. They were, I mean, they certainly were. They were war criminals and stuff, but they were just doing this because they were sick and tired of the Rhodesian government. Um, I guess probably more so the British. Not really. I mean, they were probably upset at the whites for having all the money and stuff and being oppressive, but I don't know. They weren't really like typical criminals. My headset might die soon because it dies after 25 minutes or something. I don't get it. This never happens on PlayStation. I guess my computer's just like that, but yeah, the white Rhodesians viewed it as a war on crime, as opposed to like an actual war, and many of them fled to South Africa or to England, because pretty much everyone born there was born when it was an English colony, and I'm sure all the whites had uh, some kind of English citizenship, so they're like, "Fuck it, we're just gonna go to England if we're just gonna die here, or like get fucked up." Yeah, and the rebels were just killing a lot of white people, so the white people were like, "We're out," and I'm sure if the black people had citizenship, they would have fled too. They would have been like, "Fuck it, I'd." I'd rather go to England, and England was probably pretty fucking racist at the time. But they were probably like the people in the ethnic minority who were being killed were probably like, I'd rather have someone be racist against me than someone kill me because of my ethnicity. But um, I'm sure because it was like basically an apartheid state that they didn't have citizenship. Um, but yeah, and the war just kind of like right now how I'm fizzling out. The war just kind of fizzled out. It was like Ian Smith kind of realized we're running out of military equipment. We're running out of young men to fight because all the whites were leaving. Uh, and it was just like, fuck it, dude, we can't keep fighting this war. So that's kind of why it's like Vietnam. Um, but in 1977, Ian Smith, the prime minister, began transferring power to the black majority, doing so through moderate leaders like Nkomo. I think Nkomo was um, killed sooner or later. Let me look it up. Yeah. Oh no, he wasn't. But it says he was the vice president from 1990 until 99. And if you look at Nkomo and Ngabe, um, Nkomo more so, but I mean, yeah, Nkomo definitely. Nkomo looks like a big, like, Southern lawyer. He's a black dude, but he's like a big dude. He has a cane. He wears like suits and stuff. And you can tell just by looking at him how fucking corrupt he is. Like, he was not absurdly corrupt, but he was nothing. Like, he was nothing compared to Ngabe, but he was still pretty corrupt, and he was the Zanu. But yeah, if you just look at him, like you can see this guy's kind of a fucking sleazebag. Uh, but yeah, and I think they did it mostly through him. Or there's this guy, his name was like Bishop something, but that I think did a lot of negotiation. Or that Ian Smith did a lot of negotiation with. But as we'll see, a moderate leader was not someone who came into power. But yes, Robert Mugabe would, who was ZANU, would rule Zimbabwe from 1980 to 2017 when he was impeached. So I'm gonna see Robert Mugabe. He's dead. Mugabe. I don't know why. Well, I'm saying Mugabe, but yeah, he basically left the country. Uh, and so did Ian Smith, to be fair. But Ian Smith, like, he was like racist. He wasn't like a good guy or any of. Yeah, I'd say he wasn't the best of guys, but he was. He really did care about the country, like whether or not he was a good person or whether he um his thoughts were right. He really did care about it. Um, yeah, I mean, he was wrong, but he did care about it. He clearly wasn't just in it for the money or whatever. He thought what he was doing was right, and he wasn't corrupt or anything. He was morally corrupt, but he he wasn't like, I don't know how to explain. He wasn't in it for the money or anything else. He was in it for the love of the game. He was racist for the love of the game. But yeah, Robert Mugabe would become president, and he was the ruler. So he was, I think, the prime minister until 1987, and then after 1987 to 2017, he was the president. And like I said, this guy was killing a lot of his fucking opponents and shit. And so, oh yeah, not a good guy. And he became the president. And basically, after the war was over, all the whites fled to South Africa or back to England. And I'm guessing those that fled to South Africa were probably Dutch people, like people who had been there for like 500 years, and they were like, "Fuck, we can't go to England." Or like, our families have been here for half a fucking millennium. So they probably, that's probably why they fled to South Africa instead of England. And I looked it up now. I don't think it's even like 1% of Zimbabwe's white. So I don't even think, and I think a lot of the 0.3% that was the other group left too. I think Zimbabwe is almost 100% black nowadays. But, and like I said, these decolonial transitions, or the transition from like white to black power, they weren't smooth and they weren't done well because the whites were just like, fuck it, we'll just go somewhere else. And completely just abandon it. And because the whites owned all the industry, these countries became very quickly deindustrialized, and you know they went from like kind of first world like second world countries, I'd say, to third world countries very quickly because the whites who owned all the industry left, which is why it's kind of a war with two losers because the whites lost all their money, and so did the blacks. Um, and so everyone was just kind of poor, and everyone was just kind of dead. So it was a pretty shitty war. All war was shitty, but I mean the results. It wasn't like World War II where I was like, we beat the Nazis. See, it was kind of like, fuck, dude, this just sucks for everyone now. But yeah, and then from 1983 to 87, Robert Mugabe would lead a genocide against the Indebele people, killing 20,000. So, and the Indebele were okay. Fucking Mike died again, right as I was talking about the genocide. But the Indebele people were largely associated with ZAPU, which was the other guerrilla group. Um, and that's probably why they identified more with Zepu, because this other, probably the ethnic majority that was Zanu, were beefing with them. But yeah, we're ending both. Last episode, that dolphin killed itself after it did a bunch of acid in a bank, and now we're talking about a genocide. But I'm not gonna go too into detail because I really don't know anything about it. But and I just wrote this down because I was like, we can't end on a genocide, dude. But it was known as Zimbabwe Rhodesia from 1979 to 1980, and then from then on, it was known as Zimbabwe. But I'm just gonna try to fucking think of some fun facts to tell you about, or maybe I'll just talk about Rhodesia or something. But because we can't, that sucks. Yeah, just 2 depressing episodes in a row. I'll pick a fun one for next week, I promise. We're gonna do like pirates or something fun, and we're gonna leave all the shitty parts out. Alright, but yeah. After Mugabe took over, he just started calling it Zimbabwe, which I always wondered what does Zimbabwe mean. This is what we'll end the episode on, so we don't have to talk about uh the genocide. Zimbabwe derived from the Shona Zimbabwe, meaning houses of stone or stone buildings. Okay. And this Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, whatever you want to call it, had a lot of empires there before it. Because it was like this big flat expanse. It wasn't like the DRC or whatever, or it was like super thick jungle. Although it's not the most transversable, however you say it, place, but it it was it did have a lot of empires there before, but obviously they didn't have guns and stuff, and so the South Africa mining company just came in there and fucked them up and took over. Oh, and the capital, Harare, was known as Salisbury, like the state, back when it was under colonial rule or white rule, whatever you want to call it, but which I thought was funny. It's like it's named after the state, but yeah, and that's kind of the end of it, end of today. I'm trying to think. I had something else I wanted to say about Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe Rhodesia, but yeah, that's the end of this episode. Uh, thanks to listening. Thanks for listening to the people. I know there's only 2 people listening, and me. I'm on my actual Spotify playing these episodes, so I'm a fucking dirtbag like that. But yeah, thanks for listening. Next week will be more. I think I said it last week, but I mean it this time. Next week will be more lighthearted. No, I promise no genocide. I promise. But yeah, next week will be something fun, like cowboys or pirates or something like that. Maybe a short story. Be like a fun short story, but or maybe a biography on like a comedian or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's the end of today's episode. If you listen, thank you. Like I said, those documentaries, check them out if you want to. I think they're pretty interesting, but like I said, a lot of violence in there. So yeah, that's all I gotta say for this one. Hope I see you next week. Peace.